Shalom Chaverim. Today, Parashat Bereshit, the Torah portion of Bereshit, which is the first Torah portion in the Torah. We're beginning again to read the Torah. We're beginning a new Jewish year, which is 5786, or in Hebrew, Tafshin Pei Vav. So welcome to the new year and to the first Torah portion. And we're going to do it together with Rabbi Soloveitchik, who's really one of my favorite Jewish philosophers. And we talk about it more. We're going to do it through his very, very powerful work, The Lonely Man of Faith. So let's begin with a line from Soloveitchik's work. Dignity is discovered at the summit of success. Redemption in the depths of crisis and failure. Okay, let's unpack this. So first of all, a little bit about Soloveitchik. Was born in 1903, died in 1993, so definitely a 20th century figure. This essay, actually, The Lonely Man of Faith, was published in 1965. Soloveitchik is mostly associated with the formation of the modern Orthodox movement in the U.S., and he served as the head of Yeshiva University in New York from 1941 and until he died. And really, he took this job from his father and really ordained thousands of rabbis. Also, what's interesting about Soloveitchik is that he is considered to be one of the most powerful voices of Jewish existentialist thought. So this is very interesting, the intersection of existentialism and Judaism. As you know, to define existentialism in one line would be that existence precedes essence. Meaning that no one is born with a certain goal, a certain meaning, that this is something that we form throughout the course of our lives. And this is very, if you think about it, radical when it comes to Judaism and Jewish thinking. But Soloveitchik actually managed to marry that, and I think the most known of those ideas come from here, from The Lonely Man of Faith, and we will get into that in a second. So the base of this essay is actually our Torah portion, is actually the Torah portion of Bereshit. And some of you may not know, but Bereshit has not one, but two stories of creation. More precisely, two different stories of the creation of man, of humans. Okay, the first one appears in chapter 1, the second one appears in chapter 2. So in chapter 1, we have famously, ויאמר אלוהים, נעשה אדם בצלמנו כדמותנו, וירדו בדגת הים ובעוף השמיים, ובבהמה ובכל הארץ ובכל הרמס הרומס על הארץ. Which means, God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. Right? So that is creation number 1 in chapter 1. In chapter 2, we get the second story, which goes like this. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim, pay attention, that is Adonai here. וייצר אדוני אלוהים את האדם, עפר מן האדמה, ויפח באפיו נשמת חיים, ויהי האדם לנפש חיה. Meaning, God Adonai formed the human from the soil, blowing into his nostrils the breath of life. The human became a living being. Now, biblical criticism, or what we call מחקר, basically just, the kind of like scientific, academic research of how the Torah was written, basically points to an author who combined two different stories from two different times. They actually associate the second one to the older version. And really the key here is with the word Elohim versus Adonai. Adonai, which is the tetragrammaton, the four-letter combination, which basically associates to a Jehovic Mesopotamian tradition that was written earlier, whereas Elohim, which is also written in a plural, is a later story. So, you know, if that interests you, you can look deeper into that. And by the way, Soloveitchik does acknowledge that. He's very well aware of biblical criticism, but as most commentators would say, but it's not that interesting. So what is interesting, there's obviously, as you can imagine, tons of Torah commentary about this multiplicity of versions. But here is what Soloveitchik has to say about these two versions. So he basically says that in these two creation stories, two types of men were created. In the first story was created the man that he would call the majestic man. In the second version, created the man that he calls the man of faith. Now, let's explain each and every one of them. So first of all, the majestic man. What is the majestic man? It was created, if you remember, in the image of God. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? It means that it took God's inherent and most important quality of creation. Human beings are creators and have the drive and the ability to create. And I want to read it from Soloveitchik as himself, as he describes that trait. So he says, he calls the majestic man, he calls him also Adam the first or Adam the second. Okay, so Adam the first, who was fashioned in the image of God, was blessed with great drive for creative activity and immeasurable resources for realization of this goal. The most outstanding of which is the intelligence, the human mind, capable of confronting the outside world and inquiring into its complex working. So, what Soloveitchik says is the majestic man was actually thrusted with intellect, with the ability to manipulate nature and dominate nature. And we really see it in the actual verse, right? So after it says that God was created with this ability, they shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all of the creeping things that creep on earth. So here, the majestic man was created with the goal to dominate nature. And so basically, the majestic man has basically has the selfish goal to always better themselves, for always self-betterment. And that self-betterment is to be the best humans that we can be. And Soloveitchik calls it to be with dignity. So to illustrate what that dignity is, and he really writes here beautifully, says, men of old who could not fight disease and succumbed in multitudes to yellow fever or any other plague with degrading helplessness could not lay claim to dignity. Only the man who builds hospitals, discovers therapeutic techniques, and saves lives is blessed with dignity. So what Soloveitchik here says is that if you look at people even 200 years ago, they had less dignity than we have now, with our ability to find comfort and leisure and heal and save others, fight poverty, etc. So this is that goal of the majestic man, is to achieve that dignity. Okay, so another very important thing to pay attention is that in order to achieve that goal of creation, humans could not be alone. Humans need societies in order to thrive. If you look at any historian's account of how we got to where we got, you see that we have gotten here through cooperation. So basically, people need each other in order to better themselves. And here Soloveitchik says that it is very important to see that in the first story of creation, it says, "Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, zachar u'nekeva bara otam." So basically, he created male and female together. And what's important here is that he created two. So from the get-go, there is that companionship. All right, now let's look at the second story of creation and the second type of human, which is the man of faith. So, a very big difference. While the majestic man was created with the task to dominate the world, the man of faith was created with the task to work it. And here is our evidence. ויקח אדוני אלוהים את האדם ויניחהו בגן עדן לעבדה ולשומרה, which translates to God Adonai settled human in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. Okay, so here we need a man that is not necessarily creating, but is given a given that he needs to then respond to, that he needs to then work. Also, man in this version was created alone, lonely. And it was only later on that God noticed that loneliness, and out of that same being created another entity, the woman. But pay attention here to that loneliness. And this is the lonely man of faith, is what Soloveitchik attribute to the man of faith, is loneliness. And now let's look at the really, really fundamental difference between the two, so beautifully written by Soloveitchik here, and saying, while the cosmos provokes Adam the first to quest for power and control, thus making him ask the functional how question, Adam II responds to the call of the cosmos by engaging in a different kind of cognitive gesture. He does not ask a single functional question. Instead, his inquiry is of a metaphysical nature and a threefold one. He wants to know, why is it? What is it? Who is it? Now this is very profound, and I actually wanted to go here to no other than Richard Feynman to explain it. Richard Feynman, as a reminder, who was born in 1918, died in 1988, was the 1965 Nobel Prize laureate in physics, and for his advancement in quantum mechanics and nanotechnology. He was Jewish also, by the way. And in a BBC interview from 1983, which became really famous, Feynman basically says, science is not here to answer why questions. Science only concerns itself with the how. And the question was, if I remember correctly, the interviewer asked him, like, so why do magnets repel? Or something like this. And Feynman looked at him like, what do you mean why? You know, you cannot ask why when it's a scientific question. And he explains it with an example. If if I tell you my aunt is in the hospital, and you ask why she is in the hospital, I would say because she broke her leg. Like, why she broke her leg? Because she slipped on ice, right? At some point, you would stop. It was like, oh, she broke her leg because she slipped on ice, right? But you could continue and ask, why is ice slippery? And continue so on and so forth. So what Feynman is saying, basically, if we ask the why questions, we have to assume given truth. Otherwise, we can continue to ask why forever. And eventually we will have no answer, right? So if I take it as a given truth that ice is slippery, I would stop my why questions there, right? But if I continue them, I would get to how the universe started, etc., etc. right? So therefore, the why questions are reserved to philosophy and reserved to theology. Science is only concerned with how. With the mechanics of things, what we can observe and what we can understand. And that how changes while we are refuting theory and discovering new ones, or thinking of new ones. So the how constantly changing, but it stays with the how. And this is exactly what Soloveitchik is saying here about the two types of people. That the first type, the majestic man, is concerned with the how, and because of that concern is bettering the world, is making it incredibly and gives us the dignity that we now have. So there's a lot of credit to that how. There's a lot of credit to science. There's a lot of credit to the majestic man. But the man of faith is the person that asks why, and that is a lot more difficult, because the person that asks why will inevitably find no answers to a lot of their questions. And there's something very lonely in that pursuit. There's something very lonely because sometimes those answers could only come from some form of an internal dialogue. And so I apologize to the spoiler for those of you who would like to read The Lonely Man of Faith. But eventually, Soloveitchik reveals to us that these are not, in fact, two people, but rather two aspects of being that exist in each and every one of us. We all have in us the existence that is derived by asking why, but also most of the time by the one that is asking how. So going back to our very first line that started it, dignity is discovered at the summit of success, being it the majestic man, redemption in the depths of crisis and failure. That is the hard and unrewarding task. And I'm hoping that in this series that we do together, Philosophy of the Parasha, and now that we're starting a whole new year, a whole new cycle of Torah portions, that we would be able together to make that task of asking why a little less lonely and combine redemption with dignity. Shabbat Shalom.